guide, I thought that was beneficial because sometimes there's so much in a chapter you don't really know what to study.
Yeah, it's a little bit different, because in 108, there was one question on the study guide for one question on the exam. Every question on the exam was represented in a question in the study guide, and that was it. So I really narrowed it down. But here, as you know, it's not. It's like a bunch of questions for chapter 1, a bunch of questions for chapter 2, because in this class, like you said, we'll get together first an exam review, and I'll narrow it down. Not completely, but I will say this definitely won't be on the exam. This might be, so on and so forth.
Because I looked at the notes the other day, and that would be a lot. And then I kind of looked at the thing on the study guides online, and I'm like, there's probably like 100 questions that he could pick out of this.
Maybe, but it is written, and it's been turned into the people who handle the WVSU online stuff. So in theory, it should be switched over and put onto Google or WVSU online. But if not, it's ready. I have a different version of it ready to give you guys a different online version. So one way or the other, you're going to get it. In theory, it should you should have it starting on Sunday. It might be a little bit late. It's okay, because I doubt anybody plans on taking it as early as possible.
It's a holiday weekend.
Exactly. And I won't be here. Well, I'll wait to get that out. So until we start. But yeah, so my recommendation is to study the study guides, especially considering we haven't had the review yet. Because the first thing I'm going to do when we do a review is say, okay, do you have any specific questions from the study guides? And I'll answer those. And then whatever time we have left, then I'll just go through and just talk about every single question that I can. Maybe we'll get through them all, maybe we won't. But I want to prioritize the ones that you guys have questions about. Like, can you explain why this one was wrong? Or what is the answer to this one? Or will this be on the exam? Those are the kind of questions I'll answer.
So if we email you over the weekend, you won't get it really?
No, I'm going to be where there's no internet.
I don't blame you.
No.
I do not blame you.
And actually, yeah, it does work out because it's Marine buddies I don't see once a year. So probably, even if that wasn't the case, I probably still wouldn't look at my email, to be honest.
So were you in the service?
Yeah, some Marines. Yep. In fact, one of them might show up to class today. He's coming in from Maryland. And, we go to Kentucky, so I'm on the way. So he said, I wanted to show up to your class or your office hours because he drove overnight. I was like, all right, feel free. Yep, looking forward to it. Man, 7 minutes left.
Is that why you've been up since 4 and you're like packing?
I wish. I love that I did. Or like too excited. No, my daughters woke me up. And they wake us up every night. It was just worse last night. They both woke us up. My wife wasn't having it, so she grabbed them and put them in our bed, and she went and laid down with my son. So it was one at a time. First was my middle daughter, and that woke me up. And I got back to sleep. And she brought in the youngest daughter, and that woke me up. And then I got back to sleep. And then the youngest daughter kept every once in a while waking me up or waking her sister up. So 4 o'clock is when I got up and stayed up. But prior to that, I've been up and down. And then tonight in Kentucky, all my Marine buddies are going to be excited and partying and drinking.
And you're gonna be
giving me
tired.
a hard time. You're getting weak in your old age, which I am, but still. Awake. So for today's extra credit, like obviously the red, but also, and I didn't mention it because I forgot it, but it is College Colors Day. So today too, if you were at WVSU stuff, you could get it out. If I could, I would deduct points for other colleges on today anyway. No offense. Are you wearing? I did. I swear I didn't say that because I saw that. But I said that, and I remember you with one of the other pictures. Wrong school. Are you a student? Are you a student athlete here?
Yeah. Well, I just had to switch it out. I was wearing stilettos, and then my coach made me flip inside out
Oh.
for the workout.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great.
I should have left it like that, but I switched it back.
I want to get them to make maybe I should just have someone make it. But anyway, I want like a red WVSU shirt, for Red Fridays, but that way you can also do the WVSU thing. Like maybe just, the jacket and then where it says Red Friday. Me and 3 other people on campus will buy it. All right. Well, still have 4 minutes, 3 and some change. And again, today should be really short. I'm just going to finish this chapter. We're not going to start anything new. And we're talking about nucleic acids. We've already talked a bunch about them. The only thing we really haven't talked about are the monomers of the nucleic acids. So basically, we'll do that. And you guys can leave. I'll be stuck here for office hours. Good morning. All right. So, Bryant Curry is here. Darby Fisher. Hamilton.
Here.
And Red. Hellman. Ashley in red. Crystal and WVSU here. That's everybody. Oh yeah, and Saunders is online. So Saunders, usual stuff. Just once we get started officially, write down the attendance words. Make sure you send them in sometime between when we end the lecture and 5 minutes after that. Same for Hellman. Good morning, Hellman. I was just saying, once we do get started, it'll be the usual stuff. Write down the words, send them in. Sometimes after the lecture and 5 minutes after the lecture, right? Go 5 minutes to done. Okay. Young is here. Argus is here. Little extra credit for WVSU gear. I know I didn't say that. It is College Colors Day. A little bit more than 1 minute left. I'm going to think of some other reminders, a little bit less important, like stuff you should already know. Like the fact that your first assignment was to read the syllabus. Remind you of that again. By Sunday, technically you should have 20 points of independent work. Remember, there's other ways to do it. It's not just writing papers. It's mainly a writing assignment. There's all those videos I have out there. That's the big stuff. There's articles you can read and summarize, or there's articles you can read and make a little multiple choice question afterwards to see if you understood it. You can bring cans in every week. Go pick up trash. Details are out there somewhere. I'll get them to you, but we'll run a short on time. Tough game last night. 1 point away from, was it 1 point, right? Two. Still, good game.
Yeah.
All right, it's 8. So now for the more important announcements, since I guess no one else is showing up. Again, the exams should, in theory, open up on Sunday and then close next Sunday, right? So you should have a week. But there's a little bit of technical issues. I assure you there will be an exam available to you online this week. Just not exactly sure when. The exam review will be sometime next week. I'm waiting on some input, see when you guys want to do it. It won't be during class, so it'll be some other time. So you guys let me know when you want to do it, and I'll just choose the one that had the most support. And if you can't make it, it'll be recorded, and I highly recommend watching it. The exam should be about 50 questions. Almost all of them come from your study guide. And that's what we're going to cover on the exam review. So over the weekend, I would do the study guides, study the study guides. And then the other stuff. Lab is due, technically this week's lab, the chemistry lab is due today. Technically, next week's lab, the biological molecules lab, the pre-lab is due on Sunday. But I'm not going to be working this weekend. I'm not looking at my computer, even if I could. So as long as it's done before I get around to looking at it, which will probably be Monday evening at the earliest, then I consider it on time. So if you have something pressing in another class, I'm telling you right now, go ahead and worry about that, and then worry about this class, because I'm not going to check. What else? I guess that's it. Anybody have any questions? Oh, all right. Here we go for a really short day. Like I said, I don't want to start anything new because this is the end of what's going to be on the next exam. So I just want to finish it up. We were talking about nucleic acids, which is the last of the four. Remember, we started talking about carbohydrates, then lipids, then proteins. Now we're talking about nucleic acids. So you already know the stuff that's on the slide, right? What do nucleic acids do? Mostly we're just talking about information, storing information and passing information down from generation to generation. What kind of information? Well, the instructions on how to build proteins. Right? You're supposed to know all that. You're also supposed to know, like we've already said, there are two different types. There's RNA, there's DNA. And what we left off was talking about the differences between DNA and RNA. But I told you when I told you that that's not going to be on this exam because we're going to have a whole chapter on it later in the semester. But what we do need to talk about is the monomers. So remember, that's the big thing for this chapter. You need to know the monomers and the polymers. So the monomers of carbohydrates are monosaccharides, right? The polymers are polysaccharides. Lipids don't really have monomers and polymers, so to speak. Proteins, remember, we talked about amino acid is the monomer. Polypeptide is the polymer. And it's just a polypeptide until you form it into its correct shape, in which case it's a protein. And then we actually talked about for the first time the parts of the monomer, right? For carbohydrates, we didn't talk about the different parts of the glucose molecule, but for proteins, we did, right? We talked about the different parts of amino acids. And that's what we're about to do here. So now we're caught up. Let's talk about amino acids. Pull this up. Please work. Hey, it worked for a change. All right. So here's what you need to know. For nucleic acids, the polymer is the polynucleotide. It's nice and easy. So since this is the last biological molecule, now we can say with a big picture, they're all named after poly and then the monomer, other than proteins, right? Because polymer for carbohydrates are polysaccharides. Polymers for nucleic acids are polynucleotides. So just remember, proteins are only weird. Proteins are the only ones that have amino acid as the monomer, and then polypeptide is their polymer. So yes, polymer is the polynucleotide, therefore the monomer is the nucleotide. So remember, you have to know the different parts of the amino acids, and you also have to know the different parts of the nucleotides. So the three parts are a 5-carbon sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogen-containing base. But you can see I bolded right here, sugar, phosphate, base. If you're taking notes, that will suffice. Sugar, phosphate, and base. There's a picture of one down below. That's not from your textbook. I'm not going to give you this picture and say, all right, which one's the sugar, which one's the phosphate, which one's the base. Definitely not on this first exam, and probably not even once we have the whole chapter on this. But anyway, that's what it looks like. I'm going to show you a bunch of different pictures. But for now, are there any questions about what the polymer is, what the monomer is, and what the three parts are? All right, so speaking of amino acids, which we talked about last time, remember there was different parts. There was the central carbon, and it was bonded to an amino group, a carboxyl group, a hydrogen, and an R chain, or a side chain, or an R group. And I said that the amino acid, you remember there's 20 of them, was based on a certain part. Do you remember which part the amino acid was basically defined by? That all the parts were the same except for that one part. Do you remember? Because you do need to know that for the exam. No one knows? That's okay. Well, it's okay for today. It won't be when you take the exam. So to remind you, they were basically defined by their side chain, right? All the other parts were the same. It was that side chain, or the R group, that was different for the amino acid. For the polymers, for the nucleotides, all the parts are the same except the base. So in that sense, you could almost say the base of a nucleotide is the same as the R group of the amino acid. Because this is what defines the nucleotide. That's what sets it apart. Anyway, any questions on this before I show you a picture, a different picture, but basically the same thing? Okay, again, phosphate, sugar, base. And here's another way of looking at it: phosphate, sugar, base. And all this structure will be important later. You're going to need to know which parts attach, which parts don't attach. But for now, you don't need to worry about it. And again, I'm probably will never show you a picture of this and say which part's the phosphate, which part's the sugar, which part's the base. But speaking of the base, again, here, this is something you should know. I might ask it on this first exam. You'll definitely need to know it later. Of course, later we're really going to talk about it so much that there's almost no way you'll forget. But when we're talking about DNA, there's 4 different bases. And for now, you can just memorize the letter A, G, T, and C. Adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. The next slide I'm going to show you still has these words on the slide, but it also has pictures. So I'm not going to take questions yet. This is the same thing, go with pictures. Adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine. Notice that these are double ringed, and these are single ringed. That'll be important later. For right now, it's not. I just want to bring that up. But they're all bonded together, obviously. They're not out there all by themselves. This is how we get a double strand of DNA. So what kind of reaction do you think it is that brings 2 different nucleotides together to help build the polynucleotide? And you should know this, even though I haven't taught you, in a sense I have taught you, what kind of reaction is it that brings 2 things together to build something bigger? You need to know this for the exam, and I've been saying it since we started this chapter, which is a lot. I said it a lot of times. There's 2 options, and in alphabetical order, there's dehydration reactions and there's hydrolysis reactions. Which one is it? You're bringing things together. Oh man, you guys got to study. Unless you're going to cram. I don't recommend cramming. Do what you will, but I recommend studying throughout the weeks. But anyway, dehydration reactions. Dehydration reactions are what bring things together. Anyway, it's the dehydration reactions in this case that specifically turn the nucleotides into polynucleotides because they're putting them all together. Obviously, if it's a dehydration reaction, then we're making covalent bonds, right? And I'm going to put it next to this. Oh, excuse me, the first attendance word is going to be Kentucky. Kentucky is the first attendance word. Sorry, I didn't think about it. Anyway, I'm going to put it next to this because I'm not going to ask you about this on this first exam because, again, we're going to have a whole chapter on this. But yes, technically, it's the sugar and the phosphate that bond, right? The base is not involved in that situation. And that gives us something that we call a sugar phosphate backbone. And that's nothing that I'm going to ask you about on this first exam. But again, that's not even worth drawing. It's the sugar and the phosphate that are attached. It's the bases that kind of hang off with nothing to do with the context of this conversation. They are definitely very important. We'll talk about them later. Oh yeah, on the next slide. Something else you might need to know for this exam, definitely going to need to know it later. DNA is double-stranded. So when you see a DNA molecule, that picture of DNA, technically, that's 2 strands of DNA. That's 2 polynucleotides. What you don't need to know for this exam, but you'll definitely need to know later. This is the second little point. The base is on one strand, hydrogen bonds, the base is on the other, and that's how the 2 strands, the 2 polynucleotides are kept together in the double helix because it's hydrogen bond. Again, in this chapter, that means nothing. That will be very important later. But you should know this. This is important, and I've said you need to know it for the exam, so this is another good time to review. Between covalent hydrogen and ionic bonds, which one is the strongest of the bonds? Covalent, hydrogen, or ionic? Which one's the strongest? Don't worry, either you guys are shy, or you're really not studying, or really not paying attention. Covalent is the strongest. Which one is the weakest? Hydrogen. Hydrogen's the weakest. Again, this will be important later. For now, the fact that hydrogen is the weakest and covalent is the strongest is important only because you're going to be tested on it. But once we really talk about DNA later, that will be important. Another thing that you don't necessarily need to know yet, that you will need to know later, is that the bases pair up together. A always goes with T, G always goes with C. So again, I don't think you need to know this yet because there's going to be a whole chapter on it, but I teach out of the textbook. So since your textbook mentioned it, I wanted to as well. Because I know you guys have been reading your textbook a lot. I can tell. I'm being sarcastic. But honestly though, when you do get around to reading your textbook, I don't want you to think, wait a minute, the textbook's talking about A's and T's and C's and G's pairing up and he never mentioned it, right? So again, I teach out of the textbook for that reason. If something's in there, I try to bring it up. That way you'll know whether you need to know it or not. In this case, you do not need to know it yet. So anyway, any questions about this slide before I show you a picture that illustrates this bullet point right here? All right, well, there's then a picture that illustrates that right there. T's always go with A, right? Right, A's and T's, C's always go with G. Can you guys read all that? Can you read all these words? Or is that too small? You guys back there, can you read those? Okay, so then the next word for attendance. One on circle. So again, if you're in person, you can send those words for extra credit. For those of you online, that's the word you have to send for attendance. Any questions about that side? Okay, let's go through this really quickly. I'm probably not going to ask you this on this chapter, but you will later. There are similarities between DNA, such as the fact that both of them are polymers of nucleotides. They all consist, like I've already said, of sugar, phosphate, and base, right? Nucleotides, they're still made up of those three parts. But you can see here in this picture, and I'm going to have this in writing on the next slide, but you can see right here, some of the differences. RNA is single-stranded, DNA is double-stranded. You can see here too that RNA, well, they both have cytosine, they both have guanine, they both have adenine. You can see here RNA does not have thymine, it has uracil. And again, you don't need to know that yet. It will be important later. I'm teaching out the textbook, they presented it, so did I. And here's everything I said, but now it's written down for you. Oh yeah, and one other thing. The RNA has a different sugar, which really doesn't matter. Even in the later chapter when we go through RNA and DNA, for you guys, it doesn't matter. It just explains why it has a different name. Because deoxyribonucleic acid, which is DNA, it just refers to a different sugar. So DNA has a different sugar than RNA. Really not important in this chapter. And for you guys, since you're 100 level non-biology majors, it's not even going to be important then either. Unless it helps you remember that DNA, if you want to help remember why DNA has a different name. And again, RNA has a U, not a T. DNA has a T, not a U. Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, it's kind of funny. And this is a slightly good independent work topic. Almost every time I read this in every book, they always say like RNA has a T instead of a U, or excuse me, a U instead of a T. It's always presented that way. Well, the way I never see it is DNA has a T instead of a U, right? It's always like, this is how RNA is different than DNA. But, and you can look this up for independent work if you want to dive a little bit more into it. Basically, what we think is the RNA came first, like in the grand scheme of life and evolution. We think that RNA was the first genetic material and DNA didn't come until later. So really, when you think about it, it's not that RNA has a U instead of a T. DNA has a T instead of a U. And again, look that up for independent work if you want. Could be a simple 3-sentence paper, or you could really dive into it if it seems interesting. But anyway, one other thing that I said, RNA is single-stranded, DNA is double-stranded. Any questions about this before I show you a picture of an RNA nucleic acid as opposed to a DNA nucleic acid? Okay, there we go. So again, there's the U. The U instead of the T, so that's RNA. And I'm sure you've memorized what the DNA sugar looks like. See how much different it is? Of course, I'm being really being facetious. It's not that different. And again, for you guys, it doesn't matter at all. Chemically, it's a little bit different, but those differences don't matter in this class at all. Even for most biology majors, it's not that much, different. But anyway, are there any questions about that? All right, if you download the PowerPoint, click there, go to the study guide, and that's it. So that actually the last word for attendance will be study. That's what you guys should do. But keep in mind, like I already said, if you have other priorities, like other classes that are more pressing, deal with that over the weekend first, because I'm not checking anything over the weekend. And that's it. It's only gonna be a quick day. We are done. You guys are done. I have office hours. Have a great weekend, and I will see you on Wednesday. If you came in late, let me know you came in late. And if you guys would want to do the red picture, stick around for that.